Great to be here, so thank you for joining us for the Labour Party's first significant policy announcement since the last election. It's great to be here as part of Startup Week. What you all have seen downstairs are just a few of the examples of the businesses that have so much potential to help grow New Zealand's economy, create good, well-paying jobs, and create opportunities for New Zealanders. We will need a government that backs those things. Like a lot of New Zealanders, I am concerned about the direction that our country is heading in. As a parent with 2 young kids, I worry a lot about what kind of future they are going to inherit from us. Unemployment's going up, inflation is going back up again. More and more New Zealanders are simply giving up and leaving the country while our economy shrinks, businesses close, and opportunities seem to be disappearing. We need to turn that around. We need to create a future that young New Zealanders will want to be part of. A reason for our young New Zealanders to come home after their OE. A reason for them to stay here in New Zealand because they know they can get good, well-paid jobs that will create the sort of opportunities that they deserve. A future made in New Zealand, by New Zealanders, for New Zealanders. Today we're announcing the establishment of the New Zealand Future Fund. It will be one of the cornerstone measures of our next Labour government. The New Zealand Future Fund is about creating those good, well-paid jobs. It is about backing our next generation of amazing, innovative New Zealand businesses. It is about investing in the technology and the infrastructure that we will need in the future for New Zealand to thrive. It is about rejecting the idea that we can get ahead and that we can solve our problems by selling what little we have left to overseas investors whilst not investing in our own future. This is about turning that around and saying we have what we need here in New Zealand to succeed. We need to back New Zealand businesses to succeed. We need to create opportunities for future generations. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Barbara Edmonds, who's going to tell you a little bit about the Future Fund and how it's going to work, and then we'll be happy to take your questions.
Tēnā koutou katoa. The Future Fund is the first step to realising New Zealand's potential, a future made in New Zealand, by New Zealanders, for New Zealand. It will back New Zealand ideas and turn them into innovative businesses and good jobs, so New Zealand wealth works for New Zealanders, not foreign investors or speculators. What's the problem we're trying to fix? New Zealand doesn't lack talent, skills or good ideas. What we lack is backing. Decades of low domestic investment have held back productivity and wages. Other countries have built wealth by backing their own potential. New Zealand must do the same. Too many New Zealand grown ideas and businesses have had to go offshore to find the backing that they need because they couldn't get it here. That takes away jobs, that takes away opportunities with them. That has to change. The Future Fund is a purpose built to back Kiwi ideas and small innovative businesses. It sits alongside the New Zealand Super Fund, independently governed by the guardians of the New Zealand Super and with the Minister of Finance as the sole shareholder. Seeded with a number of Crown assets plus an initial capital one-off injection of 200 million. Top of the list will be publicly owned commercial assets. We won't go into the specific of what those assets are today, obviously because of commercial sensitivities and market disclosures. But we will ensure these assets remain in public ownership for generations to come, and it will be managed responsibly to create long-term wealth for all New Zealanders. The benefits of having a future fund is that every investment will help to create well-paid jobs here at home so Kiwis can build their futures here in New Zealand, not offshore. It's around investing in resilient infrastructure. It's about lower costs for families and businesses by investing in the solutions to bring down those costs. And most importantly, it's to keep the skills, ideas, and the profits here at home. Christopher Luxon, when he was elected, promised to make things better. Today's CPI numbers show that things have actually gotten worse. We can't wait for foreign investors and speculators to save us. I believe, we have the ideas, the skills, the talents right here in New Zealand. The Future Fund is the first step to realising our potential as a country, made in New Zealand, by New Zealanders, for New Zealanders.
Happy to answer your questions.
Ultimately, like the superannuation fund, like KiwiSaver, it had to start somewhere. If you look offshore, there are a number of countries that have their own wealth fund, seeded by capital assets or injections. If you look at Temasek in Singapore, that was seeded with $450 million of assets. That has grown substantially for the benefit of Singaporeans. So what we're saying here today is, we're making a mark in the sand. We want a future here for our children and our families. This is one way to start it in the first step.
That's the cash contribution that the government will be putting in, but in addition to that, we'll obviously be vesting some of our existing assets into the fund as well. Those are assets that generate a financial return that can then be reinvested by the fund. So the fund will immediately have a source of income from existing assets that we already have.
What kind of scale are we looking at for this fund? What kind of scale is this one?
Ultimately, we're looking for a fund that will help to grow and back creative businesses here in New Zealand. We're not going to say how much it's going to grow, because when we look offshore, other wealth funds, such as Temasek, such as the Irish Wealth Fund, such as in Scotland, these are decisions made by governments who are looking ahead for the future, for the generations that are to come. So for us, in legislation, we will ensure that it invests back into New Zealand.
We've deliberately not specifically said which ones, because there are market disclosure requirements, potential market sensitivities, but we have said that on the list would be some of our state-owned enterprises, potentially mixed ownership model companies and so on. But there's obviously a process that we would need to go through in government before we could, I guess, publicly name those.
Without that detail, how can voters trust this?
Voters can trust that Labor won't be selling state assets. The alternative is a government, a national government, who are more interested in selling off what little remaining we have left. We're saying we want to keep those assets and use those to help grow more wealth for New Zealand.
Will you be able to borrow against those assets? Will you be able to borrow against the assets you're legislating not to sell?
So the fund will be set up at arm's length to the government, with the Minister of Finance as the sole shareholder. There'll be a letter of expectation in legislation that goes with this. So once it's at arm's length and it's managed by the guardians of the super fund, those commercial decisions and taking a pro-business, pro-employment for investment in New Zealand, that will guide them as to where the investment so it can stay in New Zealand.
Why not change the super fund? Why are you creating a
So the super fund set up by Sir Michael Cullen was for the maximising of returns to pay for future super. This is a different purpose, because currently the super fund does invest offshore. Only about 11 to 18% is invested here in New Zealand. We're putting a line in the sand and saying we want to create the wealth here in New Zealand. The government wants to back a fund so it can be reinvested into the New Zealand economy. So they are different purposes, but again, they'll be managed by the guardians of the super.
It's not a real idea, though. I mean, New Zealand First has mandated a fund like this at its last 2024 conference, and just steering those kinds of ideas.
I was alerted to this, that had skipped my attention, because I think that conference they spent most of it slagging us off instead. But I did go back and have a look at what scant detail is available about that. It would appear to me that that's more about creating a fund for investment in infrastructure that has overseas investors investing in it. That is not what this is about. This is about New Zealanders investing in New Zealand through a public sovereign wealth fund that's about investment in New Zealand. That's not something that we've even given any consideration to.
So you come up with a 200 million figure?
So that's based on what we're looking at fiscally. Obviously our fiscal plan will come out next year, closer to the election. But if you have a look at the way the New Zealand Super Fund contributions are on the capital side.
Would you look at capital gains tax for this? You mentioned speculation 5 times in that policy document.
We'll be setting out our tax policy before the end of the year. Watch this space.
Where do you get 200 million from?
As a one-off capital allowance, and we'll set that out as part of our fiscal plan next year.
So you set aside, so you mentioned in your document, Temasek is the model, but Temasek can freely buy and sell assets and frequently sells billions of them every year. So how are you going to achieve that kind of performance, both in terms of the performance of the assets and the portfolio, if you have to get ministerial sign-off for selling the non-seed assets, and then also you can't sell the seed assets?
So we've in the documentation we've set out some international comparators, but this will be a uniquely New Zealand fund by New Zealand for New Zealand, so it won't be modelled exactly on any other fund that exists around the world. This will be designed for New Zealand. It will sit alongside the New Zealand Superannuation Fund. So the New Zealand Superannuation Fund is all about maximising the return. This has a different purpose. This is about maximising the public good. And so we'll set all of that out very clearly, both in the legislation and in the letter of expectation. The fund will be able to buy and sell assets, but in terms of the seed assets that go into it, particularly given their strategic importance, potentially, there'll be different restrictions around the potential to sell those.
But it still needs ministerial sign-off to sell just the basic assets in the fund, right? So that's going to...
In the same way that it currently is required under government rules. So obviously when you get in, when you do the letter of expectations, if we need to tweak it in the future, then that's what we can do via legislation. But you need to start the fund. We need to use our wealth better, and this is one way to do it. So there was a comment around the Māori economy.
Yeah. Well, this could be a potential co-investor alongside Māori in innovative new Māori businesses and infrastructure around the country. We know there's a lot of interest from iwi who want to invest in the country's infrastructure and want to invest alongside government in those things. So the Future Fund will certainly be able to invest alongside iwi. We know there's a lot of interest there.
There's also the Indigenous Investment Fund that has been developed by the Queen, by the Māori Queen. We believe that this is a really good opportunity to show partnership with government and with Māori to be able to use the wealth here in New Zealand and to reinvest it back into our economy.
How does Labour plan on supporting rangatahi Māori, ensuring they get good skills and good jobs that they want to make?
We'll be setting out, again, this is not our only policy, there's obviously a lot of policy to come, and we will have a fairly comprehensive skills training policy. That's still to come. But this fund, about investing in our innovators and so on, is about creating the sort of employment opportunities that can flow from that. We then need to make sure we're matching up the skills system so that it's delivering the sorts of skills that those businesses are going to need.
Māori rangatahi are smart, and we know that they've got higher unemployment than the general public. We want to make sure for them and for their children, for their mokopuna, that they have opportunities to stay here rather than join the 200 people per day who are leaving our country for other shores. I'm actually speaking to them tonight.
Oh yeah, and what do you hope to help?
Definitely talk to them about this announcement, understand a bit more where they are developed in relation to their Indigenous Wealth Fund, and be able to see where we can work together in the future. But clearly what we're trying to say is here's another pool of capital that we can help invest with you into New Zealand, and ultimately it's to support and be alongside those other funds that are happening. We still have KiwiSaver, we have super funds, we have ACC funds. This is another pool of capital for innovative businesses to access.
Do you think there is enough collaboration at the moment between iwi, between Māori and government?
I think there can be a lot more. There is huge opportunity for the Crown, the government, to work alongside Māori in future investment in the country. We're very excited about the possibilities there, and we definitely want to partner.
What doesn't help is the government claiming iwi ideas for themselves, such as the deal that was done a little bit earlier that started before the investment summit. That's not how good relationships work.
There's a lot of mentioned QB as perhaps one of the state assets that could be sold off down the future. What's your thinking there? I mean, you won't say which assets might come in under the future fund, but people would want to know. So can you give any indications? QB, would you pull that in under the future fund?
That is a key difference between our approach and the approach of the current government. They are looking at what they can sell of what little we have left. We're not interested in that conversation. We are interested in growing New Zealand's collective wealth. The Future Fund will be about growing New Zealand's collective asset base, not selling things off.
So QB, will that be in the future fund?
We're going to set that out once we are in government. Because, as I've said, some of those potential assets, there are sensitivities around that.
Amelia.
I'm laying aside all conflicts of interest, I'm not going to specify the individual ones today.
Amelia.
There's a lot of this document on things going to this fund, or is it only mixed ownership that you put into the fund?
So the government owns around $450 billion worth of assets. So there's a large pool of assets, including state-owned enterprises. We will work and confirm in government what those assets are. But we want this fund up and running quickly, and we are making sure that we're indicating both to the New Zealand public and to our future officials that this is what's going to happen.
So there could be highly state-owned enterprises like TPZ, like Kimbro, like QB, that could be in this fund.
We're specifically not naming individual entities today, and as I've said, there are really important reasons for that. There are some commercial sensitivities involved. There's also a need to manage a process to work alongside the people who would potentially be affected by that.
How quickly do you think you can work through that process? If you're saying that you want to get this fund up and running fast, but then you're not going to decide on which assets go into the fund until you get into government, how long is that going to take?
The policy instructions have been continuing since we've started developing this, and we will take it right up to the election. So that on my first day as the Minister of Finance, those instructions are ready for my officials to deliver them. Amelia.
There's a lot
You would
in
have decided them, like you were just saying, you would have decided which one.
I will give them a structure in the framework of the commercial information I have on hand in order to, so we can get the fund up and running.
then how long will it take for New Zealanders to see the returns of those?
You'll see a variety of different returns over time. Some of the seed investments, they could be making investments relatively quickly because we want them to be, helping us with job creation. We've got to do a lot more to create jobs and to keep New Zealand's innovators here in New Zealand. The catalogue of New Zealand's most innovative businesses that have started here and ended up being bought up and gone offshore is extensive. There is huge opportunity for more investment, more backing of New Zealand, New Zealand's emerging business talent.
There's a lot in this document about promising that you've changed. How can New Zealanders trust that you've changed when you've essentially got the same team and it was only 2 years ago that you turned out?
Well, we don't have the same team. We actually have quite a different team. Barbara
I'm different.
Barbara is certainly different. And Barbara's been the architect of this policy, and I absolutely back it because I think it is a different way of thinking about how we use the huge asset base that the Crown has now to help grow New Zealand's economy and grow opportunities for New Zealanders in the future.
How
And when
has Labour changed as a party?
So for us, it's about, in the last 18 months, to listening to the electorate. You gave us a really strong message. You didn't want us to be in government. So the last 18 months, our whole team has been talking to communities, businesses, organisations up and down the country to understand where we could have gone better, what we should do when we come in. The number one thing that is constantly being said to me is we want a long-term vision and plan for our country. The Future Fund is the first step to that. And if you look back at Labour history, when Sir Michael Cullen started the Super Fund, when he started KiwiSaver, when he started KiwiBank, there was criticism that it would not work. However, he started it and backed his team and backed New Zealand to be able to come on board with a fund that is now will help us pay for retirement, help people save for their retirement, and ultimately to be a disruptor in the banking sector.
Because the about 200 million up front, is there a consideration of putting more money into the future fund as the term rolls on?
I'm not going to rule that out, and again, it'll be dependent on our fiscal plan, but this is the one-off injection that we will make to seed it.
So if you look at the trouble, didn't actually produce returns if you pump the money into it?
We look at the super funds, they make investments across different sectors, across different countries. Some things fail, some things do really well, so to take those peaks and troughs. So it's about putting it at an arm's length to the politicians, having a commercial approach to the way that they manage their assets, and being really clear that the dividends and the revenue coming from it should be reinvested into New Zealand businesses to create jobs.
But why should the government take out more debt to invest in companies that might not deliver good returns?
So debt on the government's books is actually accounted for as an accounts receivable. It's an asset. So if you look at the way debt is, that debt that's owed to the government. But what we're saying is once we seed those commercial assets into the fund, we will ensure that the guardians of the super fund, through our letter of expectation, through the legislation, are really clear. We want it to grow, but we want the dividends and the wealth that is created through that to be reinvested into New Zealand so it can be shared by all.
Does the debt that you're taking on, does that count towards net program debt? Would that be considered?
Again, we'll set it out as part of our fiscal plan, but in the same way the super fund has annual contributions, there needs to be a way to account for it in the books as well.
Is there a reason why that 200 million isn't in the policy document?
It's in our PR.
Why wouldn't you put more costings in the document?
Because it's a one-off capital injection. Yeah.
So what are you seeking from this? I mean, are you seeking a higher commercial rate of return to drive commercial sensibilities in the assets you already own? Are you seeking that from the new assets? Or are you seeking a kind of a return just above inflation for social good assets? What are you looking for?
We are seeking public good investment in New Zealand that creates jobs and that grows New Zealand's collective public wealth for the current and future generations. It's a clear rejection of the asset sales mantra that has been, spouted for the last 40-odd years in New Zealand. It's saying that rather than continuing to shrink our public wealth, we want to grow it because that will benefit future generations, and it will mean that kids like mine actually have a reason to stay in New Zealand.
But the asset managers that you're going to do this, they're going to need a target of some kind. I know that you're not setting up the exact numerical target, but they're going to need some kind of target in terms of return, right? That's why you're using them.
Well, the letter of expectation in the legislation will be that you need to grow. And the reason why you need to grow is because we have to keep opportunities here in New Zealand. Doing nothing and having no plan like we currently have under this government is not working. And for me, as a mother of 8 as well, I want my children, I want your children, I want your families to be able to have those opportunities here in New Zealand. Today is the first step, and we will be clearer around that letter of expectations and what's needed in relation to the public good when we get into government.
Can I just check, so will you grow, your expectation that you'll grow the fund to a certain limit before you start to kind of invest in businesses and infrastructure, or will you do it at the same time, and if so, what sort of percentage will be, how much will you kind of carve out for investing in businesses straight away and the rest just to be kind of invested in growth?
The fund will grow by doing those things. So unlike the New Zealand Super Fund, whose remit is just very narrowly focused on maximising financial returns, this fund's remit will be financial returns by investing in New Zealand.
So the investment in businesses, will that be a loan? Will you be expecting to buy shares, or how does it?
In the same way that different funds such as ACC, KiwiSaver and Super Fund, they make that risk assessment for themselves. They need to be able to work out what's the best way to do that, through debt, through equity or through grants. But again, coming back to where our role is as government and as leaders, we're saying very clearly to them that investment needs to stay in New Zealand, to grow Kiwi jobs and to keep our people here.
Super Fund took a bit of time to grow its returns to be able to actually invest. So, I mean, realistically, can this actually investments happen, new investments, by the end of a first potential term with Labour government?
What we're seeing from this government is a lot of short-term decision making. Short-term that doesn't look into how this affects future generations. The super fund, you look at the success today, it's going to help pay for future super costs. I make no apology for the fact that we have to start somewhere, and I believe that this is one way we can create a future where our families and Kiwis want to stay here.
Yeah, but will it actually invest in the super fund for a long time to generate returns to be able to reinvest in different assets? So will this actually generate?
And that's why we want to get it up and running as soon as possible. So obviously, if you seed it with commercial assets, there will be dividends that are paid. That is to be reinvested into the fund for the public good.
Why not just encourage state-owned assets to get lazy then if they're protected with legislation? What's their incentive for them to grow?
I actually think the opposite. I think by putting a vehicle over the top of some of those state assets, bringing a more professional focus to the way they are overseen, I think will certainly help in sharpening the focus of them, but also allowing for reinvestment. New Zealand has not necessarily been well served by having energy companies that have extracted huge dividends which have gone back to shareholders rather than being reinvested in new generation, for example. The New Zealand Future Fund will be able to reinvest, should those companies end up in it, would be able to reinvest in a way that will create jobs and actually have some public good benefits as well.
The current...
Companies aren't paying dividends, what happens to them?
So the current situation is if a company or a government-owned company is making dividends or giving a return to the government, it's basically up to the government to spray it wherever they want. You know, they can invest in oil, gas, subsidy underwrites, they can invest in tobacco company HTPs. We're actually clearly saying through legislation that money can't be touched by the politicians because it has a clear mandate in legislation and the letter of expectation, and that is to reinvest back into New Zealand for the public good.
Is it reinvested either into the companies themselves or reinvested into other projects in the portfolio? Is that...
Those would be the decisions for the portfolio manager.
So how much would realistically be available for investing in new assets, given you've got all these investment needs in the existing assets that are going to be paying up?
This is just one policy. There'll be other policies to deal with, for say energy issues, to deal with cost of living, to deal with the infrastructure. This is just a first step in saying that we want to be able to manage our public assets better so that the wealth is recycled back into our economy for those key areas.
Aren't things this new campaign design? Is this what we'll see more of next year?
Oh.
You might see a little bit more of that. I'm pleased to see you focused on the details there. Maybe one of the potential candidates. We haven't got that far ahead with the campaign yet.
And given that this is the first policy announcement, was this type of policy signalling for the election next year from Labor?
You can expect to see a very optimistic vision for New Zealand's future from Labor. We've spent 2 years around the country listening to New Zealanders. We've assessed, things that worked well when we were in government, things that we needed to do differently and to do better. What you'll see from Labor now is some new ideas, some bold new thinking, and a real vision for the future, because we can't continue to go on the way we are now. Lots, but there's not a specific number.
What criteria do you expect will be set out in order for businesses to access the
So that'll be up to the guardians of the super fund as we transfer the assets over. They will need to set up the criteria so that it aligns with both what the legislation requires and the letter of expectations by the minister. But we've seen their success at the moment with the super fund. They are returning more than what they forecast. So they have a clear and a very good solid record around investment.
How many businesses are going offshore for capital?
I don't have a specific number, but a lot. I mean, if you were downstairs now, if you're downstairs now and speaking to some of those startup businesses, many of them are looking offshore, and many New Zealand businesses, there's a long list of New Zealand businesses that have started here and ended up basically being sold offshore. We're now going through a situation where some of our most established businesses and established brands are now being sold offshore as well. New Zealand can't sustain having all of our, precious assets being purchased offshore.
So the Productivity Commission, before they were collapsed by the current government, they outlined 5 key areas for why New Zealand has low productivity and wages. One of the key areas was access to capital, because we have shallow pools of capital. Across the world, where there have been wealth funds set up by different countries and in different ways, it is another access for capital.
Chris Hipkins was downstairs and he asked a number of those businesses downstairs if they need capital, and you said no, they don't.
All businesses are at different parts on their journey. I ask most of the new startup businesses that I meet how they're finding accessing capital, and there is a common picture there around when they need capital. There are certainly, many of them will say they can get money for R&D. They can get money once they've got a scalable product. It's that bit in the middle that they really struggle with. So all of those businesses will have a different story. You would have heard that, I think the second to last one that I spoke with has completely funded his business development so far by himself. But at some point, if he wants to scale that up, he's going to need some external help with that.
And once you get past the startup phase, the gazelle phase is what would be described by the OECD, for example. It's that growth phase before it actually lifts to quite a significant business. That's where access to capital can be quite difficult for those companies.
Will there be any strings for companies who seek government funding? Like, for example, they're not able to sell to an overseas investor or anything like that?
That criteria will be worked through by the guardians of the super fund, but the main thing is they have to oblige by what the legislation says, which it needs to be reinvested into New Zealand. Whether that company by itself decides to partner with both with the future fund or an offshore investor, that's a decision for that company. But ultimately, the wealth that's created from the future fund needs to be reinvested in New Zealand.
I can tell you, I've been and visited a number of these new and emerging businesses around New Zealand. They are patriotic New Zealanders who have kids in New Zealand who want to grow a better future for New Zealand. They are worried that the only way they can access capital is to basically sell their intellectual property or sell their ideas offshore. They would far rather have those opportunities to see investment here in New Zealand so they can grow their businesses in New Zealand. They go offshore because they don't see other options. We want to create other options for them.
Inflation. This 3% result, Chris Bishop says that's good, that's on target. Is that good news?
I think all New Zealanders can see that inflation hurts New Zealanders. This government said they were going to fix inflation. Inflation came down because the Reserve Bank hiked up interest rates. Now inflation is going back up again, largely because of decisions that the government is taking. Government is driving up inflation again.
Do you think that 3% is acceptable given it is in the Reserve Bank's target?
It's the top of the band, but ultimately Christopher Luxon was elected on the promise to make things better. The fact that last quarter it was 2.7 and it's now 3%, with an energy price spike that's higher than it was back to the 89. It's like we're going back to the 80s, but actually what we're trying to say is you promised to make it better, your plan isn't working, and our plan is today the first step towards a future made in New Zealand.
Oh, sorry, just one more quickly. Will returns be required to exceed the cost of capital?
That's a decision that we'd work with the guardians of the super fund, because again there's different ways you can invest in companies and businesses, but ultimately the returns need to remain in New Zealand.
I guess branching off that, big issue is cost of capital. So is your expectation that the cost of capital that's lent to businesses or provided businesses, that's going to be lower through this fund if you decide to invest in
It will be.
commercial?
It will be competitively. It will be competitive against the market, but obviously because the fund is being seeded by capital assets, there's a little bit more there that can be accessed.
How confident or concerned are you that the party Māori can sort out this inflation?
Maybe before we move on to other questions, is there any other questions on the announcement or on the economy? Because we've got Barb here, and then I'm happy to take other questions. So, any other questions on the policy or the inflation? Okay.
What are you saying is driving up inflation? You're saying that it's the government's fault. What are you saying?
Well, for over a year, they sat on an energy report about what needs to be done to help with the energy sector. We wrote to them in August saying, let's work on a bipartisan strategy. The government sat on their hands and energy prices have spiked, again going back the highest since 1989. The government has spent the last 2 years sitting on their hands while things are getting worse. So about energy prices, the government needs to work on it. When I questioned them just last week, the Acting Minister of Finance, Chris Bishop, I said, will this drop power prices? And he said, it'll put downward pressure.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks, Barb. Happy to take other questions, Mikey.
Yeah, are you confident or concerned over whether or not the party Māori can sort out its internal fractures?
I've said that I'll set out before the next election who we could and couldn't work with, where we see common ground with the other parties, and I'm not going to do that between now and then. It's clear that Te Pāti Māori have some issues that they need to work through, and that right now, as of today, they are not in a shape to contribute positively to a potential future government. They need to sort that out.
Last week you said that you weren't sure which Te Pāti Māori to deal with because essentially you were suggesting there were more than one. Are you any wiser?
It's clear that there's a lot of internal, fracturing going on within Te Pāti Māori. They need to sort that out if they want to play a positive role in New Zealand's future.
Do you expect to have a conversation with the party level?
I'm sure we'll have I think we've committed on several occasions, we haven't yet organised it, to getting together and having a conversation between now and the end of the year. But I also want to be very clear, my job between now and the next election is to grow Labour's share of the vote as high as I possibly can grow it. The stronger Labour is going into a future government, then the less we will need to rely on other parties.
Are you intending on running list only in the Māori seat?
Sorry,
In the Māori seat? List only? Instead of one?
Oh, the decisions on, whether the Māori electoral candidates, I think what you're saying is, would the candidates in the Māori electorates not stand on the list? Those decisions, that hasn't even been discussed. Yeah.
David Seymour opening a charter school focused on sports. And is that a good idea?
I have seen that, and I noticed that he's opening it at a facility in my electorate that was built with shovel-ready funding that the ACT Party, the National Party, opposed and said was wasteful spending.
Do you think it's good that kids specialise from 11 years old in sport?
I think active education can be a very valuable thing. There's a lot of really good science around how you can incorporate active learning into the primary school curriculum. Open to those conversations. We are opposed to the charter school model, but there is certainly room within the existing public system. You can have designated character schools, you can have integrated schools. There's a lot of room for innovation within the system as it stands now, and I would not close the door on that. If you look at schools like Discovery School, for example, they operate very differently to what other primary schools operate, and they do pretty amazing things.
Government also scaled back some NCAs such as outdoor education being one of them. What research do you think it seems to have no more outdoor ed, but yes to schools?
I think the current government need to stop or slow down a bit and listen to the people who are raising very legitimate concerns. I mean, I think those early announcements they made, taking outdoor education out of the curriculum, also potentially horticulture and agriculture, doesn't understand the true nature of New Zealand's economy. A lot of school leavers will go into employment in those areas, and the government turning their backs on them is so out of touch with the employment opportunities that are available to young New Zealanders.
So would you reverse all of those schools and agriculture, outdoor education, art history? Would you
But they haven't, to my knowledge, they haven't made final decisions on those at this point. My approach as Minister of Education, when it came to the curriculum, was to be as inclusive and consultative as possible, because I don't want the school curriculum to become a political football. When we were doing work around the curriculum, when we were doing work around the NCEA, Nikki Kay, who was the then National Party education spokesperson, was extensively involved in those conversations. Even David Seymour was extensively consulted through that process when he was the sole ACT MP. I don't want to see that become a political football. So my message to the government is slow down a bit and make sure you bring people with you in any change that you're proposing.
Your announcement today, it could be seen as a form of industrial policy. Do you see it that way? And do you think there needs to be, what I'm just interested in your overall view of the need for industrial policy in the future?
Other countries around the world are taking a much more assertive stance when it comes to industrial policy, and New Zealand needs to catch up with that. Government standing back and saying, no, we're not going to get involved, isn't working for New Zealand. It's seeing young New Zealanders leave. It's seeing our most exciting new emerging businesses leave. We need to change approach, or we're going to continue to lose talent, we're going to continue to lose investment, and we're going to continue to lose opportunity. The government's rhetoric around the strikes has been so unhelpful. They should be focused on making sure working New Zealanders feel valued. Judith Collins' basic war on public servants, whether they're teachers, nurses, doctors, isn't going to help. It isn't going to get them, get a satisfactory resolution. She should frankly dial it back and focus on getting a reasonable settlement. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.